Man, it has been 4 seasons since the Pac-12 has put a team in the college football playoffs. Can they do it in 2021? I don't know, but I'm going to talk about it. Let's go. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's me again, Golden Blue Dude, and if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. I do college football videos just like this every single day. Yeah, everybody knows it's been a while since the Pac-12 has put a team in the college football playoffs, but 4 seasons? That's a long time. Last time the Pac-12 had a team in the college football playoffs was in the 2016 college football season, and it was Washington. So I wanted to do a quick flashback of what was going on in 2016. Well, first of all, in 2016, Donald Trump was elected as the United States 45th president. Good times. 2016 Summer Olympics was held in Rio de Janeiro, the first time ever in a South American country. Also, North Korea conducted its biggest nuclear test ever in 2016. The Chicago Cubs won their first World Series since 1908. To go along with that, the Cleveland Cavs, with LeBron James, come back from a 3-1 deficit and stunned the Golden State Warriors to win the NBA Finals championship and ended a 52-year championship drought for the city of Cleveland. Also, the song Black Beatles, you know that song that got stuck in your head in 2016 by Gucci Mane? Yeah, that was the #1 pop song in 2016. Don't Google it. It will get stuck in your head again. Now that I'm done reminiscing about 2016, let's talk about 2021. Does the Pac-12 have a chance of putting a team in the college football playoffs? Well, of course they have a chance, but very, very small. They've been so bad that they've been labeled as the worst Power 5 conference in the nation. That's a stigma that you have to get out from under. I would suggest that one of your teams go undefeated. You'll be in the playoffs if you can do that. Other than that, you need some major help just because of that stigma. So let's look at the Pac-12 overall. First, we'll look at the Pac-12 North. Starting off with Oregon State. Last year, they went 2-5. They're not a very good team. And according to their roster ranking, they've actually gotten worse. They went from the 54th best roster to the 109th best roster. That's bad. Here's what their schedule looks like. At Purdue, probably a loss right off the bat. Hawaii, Idaho, at USC, Washington, at Washington State, Utah, at Cal, at Colorado, Stanford, Arizona State, and at Oregon. I think it's safe to say that Oregon State will not make the playoffs in 2021. I don't even think they make a bowl. They're going to be a bad team. Next up, Washington State. They went 1-3 in 2020. Let's look at their roster ranking. Last year, their roster was ranked 55th in the nation. That's bad. This year, even worse. Their roster ranking is 60th. Not going to be a good team. Let's look at their schedule. They start off with a home game against Utah State, probably a loss. Utah State's a good team out of the Mountain West. Portland State, USC, at Utah, at Cal, Oregon State, Stanford, BYU, at Arizona State, at Oregon, Arizona, at Washington. They have a weird schedule. Their road games are bunched up. 2 here and 2 here, and 3 out of their last 4 games are on the road. It's just a weird schedule. No, I don't see Washington State getting to the playoffs or getting to a bowl. They're going to be bad. Next up, Stanford. Last year, they actually went 4-2. Not a bad team. Their roster ranking went from 21st to 50th. So, yeah, not a step in the right direction. Here's their schedule. They start off the season with a home game against Kansas State. Then at USC, at Vanderbilt, UCLA, Oregon, at Arizona State, at Washington State, Washington, Utah, at Oregon State, Cal, and Notre Dame. Not a particularly brutal schedule, but a rough one. I do think Stanford makes a bowl, but they're not going to make the playoffs. No way. Next up from the North, we have Cal. Last year, they went 1-3. Their roster ranking went from 39th to 28th, so they might be better than they were last year. Let's look at their schedule. They start off with a tough team from the Mountain West as well. Nevada could be a loss. At TCU, that's going to be a tough game too. Sacramento State, at Washington, Washington State, at Oregon, Colorado, Oregon State, at Arizona, USC, at Stanford, at UCLA. They also end the season with 3 out of their last 4 games on the road. That is rough. They have some rough road games. At TCU, at Washington, at Oregon, and at UCLA, and at Stanford. That's loaded with losses. losses right there. I think Cal will be better, might get to a bowl, no chance to make it to the playoffs, but they probably will finish in the upper half of the Pac-12 North and make a bowl. These last two teams I'm very back and forth on because it's a balance of roster and schedule. One of them will have a better roster, but the other one will have an easier schedule. So first I'll start with Oregon. Last year they finished the season 4-3. Their roster ranking went from 11th to 6th. So their roster is considered a top 10 roster in the nation. But let's look at their schedule. They start the season with a home game against Fresno State, then at Ohio State. That could be a loss right off the bat. From Stony Brook, Arizona, at Stanford, Cal, at UCLA, another tough one, Colorado, at Washington, Washington State, at Utah, and Oregon State. So I think the big thing for Oregon is their schedule. Their schedule will trip them up. I don't think Oregon is going to make the playoffs. They're going to have possibly an early loss in the season. After that, you can't lose. So even if you do get through the rest of the season undefeated, you have to win the Pac-12 championship. So I think Oregon's schedule will prevent them from getting to the playoffs. Time to look at Washington. They finished the season 3-1 last year. Roster ranking went from 17th to 35th. So they're projected to be not as good of a team as they were last year, but 35th isn't like terrible, but it's not elite either. Time to look at their schedule. Montana, at Michigan. That could be a tough road game, but Michigan is not Ohio State. Then Arkansas State, Cal, at Oregon State, UCLA, at Arizona, at Stanford, Oregon, Arizona State, at Colorado, and Washington State. So their toughest road games at Michigan, maybe at Stanford, or at Colorado. No real tough road games. So the schedule works out really well for Washington. Maybe they do have a slight chance to get to the playoffs. But you do have to remember, Chris Peterson, not their head coach anymore. So a lot of questions at Washington. If anyone out of the Pac-12 North is going to make the playoffs, it will be Washington. Now let's look at a loaded Pac-12 South. By far the better division this year. But we do have to start at the bottom of the barrel. It has to be Arizona. Last year they went 0-5. The roster ranking went from 59th to 77th. So they're going to be even worse. Here's their schedule. BYU at San Diego State at home, Northern Arizona at home, at Oregon, UCLA, at Colorado, Washington, at USC, Cal, Utah, at Washington State, and at Arizona State. So even if by some miracle their roster improved, that schedule is not going to allow them to get any better. At Oregon, at Colorado, at USC, at Arizona State, that's 3 tough road games right there. You're not getting to a bowl this year. Next up is Colorado. They actually had a decent year last year at 4-2, but their roster ranking went from 35th to 64th. That's a big step backwards. So let's look and see if their schedule did them any favors. Start off the season with Northern Colorado, Texas A&M, Minnesota, at Arizona State, USC, Arizona, at Cal, at Oregon, Oregon State, at UCLA, Washington, and at Utah. Some brutal road games. That road trip to Arizona State, a road trip to Oregon, UCLA, and Utah. I don't think Colorado makes a bowl this year. I really don't. But they could go 6-6 and barely. They're right on that fringe. Definitely no shot to make the playoffs though. Next up in the South, Utah. Last year they went 4-2. Roster ranking went from 29th to 31st. So their roster is considered slightly worse than last year. Let's see what their schedule does for them. They start off the season with Weber State, at BYU, at San Diego State, Washington State, at USC, Arizona State, at Oregon State, UCLA, at Stanford, at Arizona, Oregon, and Colorado. So not the toughest schedule that I've seen, but I see some tricky games in there. At BYU is going to be tough, at USC is going to be tough, and possibly at Stanford. So no, I don't think Utah is getting to the playoffs. Will make a bowl though, and will improve, I think. Next up on the list, UCLA. Last year they went 3-4. Their roster ranking went from 33rd to 30th. So their roster is considered to improve just slightly in 2021. Let's see how tough their schedule is. They start the season with Hawaii, LSU, Fresno State, at Stanford, Arizona State, at Arizona, at Washington, Oregon, at Utah, Colorado, at USC, and Cal. So yeah, there are some tough games in there, but it's not completely brutal. With road games at Stanford, at Washington, at Utah, and at USC. So some tough road games, but not the toughest that I've seen. So I think UCLA makes a bowl, either 6-6 or 7-5, and Chip Kelly takes another step forward in 2021. The last two, once again, very close neck and neck. But next I'm going to go with Arizona State. Their roster ranking, now this surprised me, went from 23rd to 53rd. So whenever I come out with their season preview, I'm going to look into that and see what's going on. Here's their schedule. Southern Utah, UNLV at BYU. That's going to be a toughie. Colorado at UCLA. Stanford at Utah. Washington State, USC, Washington at Oregon State, and Arizona. So they do have some tough road games at BYU, at UCLA, at Utah, and at Washington. But most of their tough games will be at home, and they do have Jalen Daniels. I think Arizona State is a much better team from 2-2 last year. I think they make a bowl and will be in the conversation of possibly winning the Pac-12 South towards the end of the year. We'll see how they navigate through this tough schedule. And I do think Arizona State has a very slight chance to make the playoffs. It depends on what Jalen Daniels does for them. So that leaves us with USC. Last year they finished 5-1. They had a shot to make the playoffs. Had they won the Pac-12 championship, I think USC could have made the playoffs. They lost to Oregon and finished the season 5-1. Their roster ranking went from 64th, I didn't know it was that low, to 8th. That's top 10. So they got a good roster. Let's look at their schedule. They start the season with San Jose State at home. That's a home game, but San Jose State is a really good team from the Mountain West. Do not underestimate them. After that, Stanford at Washington State, Oregon State at Colorado, Utah at Notre Dame, Arizona at Arizona State, at Cal, UCLA, and BYU. Not a terribly tough schedule. Really just 2 tough road games at Notre Dame and at Arizona State. All your other tough games are at home, so this is very doable for USC, but you have to be more consistent, Keaton Slovis. You were very close last year, so just take that next step, and USC does indeed have a chance to make the playoffs. So here's the question. Number 1, can they keep from beating up on each other? Can one team stand above the rest? Here's the list of teams that could possibly make the playoffs real quick. Oregon, Washington, Arizona State, and USC. That's it. One of those 4 teams has to step up and dominate the Pac-12. Look at the ACC and Clemson. What do? They dominate the ACC every year, even though the ACC has been down. That's what you have to do. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you on my next show.